That night, the halls of the keep sleep heavy with the hush of stone and shadow. Only the embers in the great hearth whisper, their soft crackles a lullaby for empty chairs and half-drunk cups of ale. Aldric lies in his chamber again, armor removed and folded with a soldier's discipline, but his mind is not at ease. He closes his eyes, hoping for dreamless rest, but his body holds the memory of weight, of metal, of sword, of the eyes that watch him always, waiting for him to become the knight they believe he already is. He remembers something from years ago, the old knight who first taught him how to ride, Sir Amond, his voice like gravel, his laugh like thunder, and a scar down his temple that never quite healed. Fear, he'd said once while brushing down a tired horse, is not a thing you get rid of, boy. It's a thing you carry just like your sword. You just learn to balance it better. Aldric didn't understand it then. He wasn't sure he understood it now, but the memory brings a kind of quiet, like a lantern in the dark. Outside his narrow window, the owls call to one another across the trees. A breeze sighs through the leaves, brushing the ivy against the stone like fingers tracing a lullaby. The moonlight spills across the sill, painting the chamber in soft silver. In the distance, a wolf howls once, and then the night holds its breath again. Aldric turns on his side, face to the wall, and lets his thoughts drift like leaves in the wind. Morning comes with the cry of the rooster and the slow clang of the kitchen bell. The keep stirs. Maids shuffle with basins of water. The steward calls roll. Aldric dresses in silence. His tunic is clean but smells of soap ash. His belt is frayed at the end. He ties it twice to keep it from slipping. Down the corridor he hears laughter, not cruel, but sharp, from two older knights. They speak of their last hunt, of the doe they brought down with one arrow, of the feast that followed. Aldric walks past without a word, unnoticed, and unnoticed is exactly how he prefers it. Training is different today. They ride out into the forest, through damp underbrush and over old hunting paths, barely touched by sun. The captain leads, his cloak billowing behind him, and Aldric rides somewhere in the middle. His horse is steady gray mare named Mora. She knows the way better than he does. The forest is quiet, and that kind of silence always makes Aldric nervous. It feels like the world is listening, like the trees have ears. They reach the clearing by midday. Targets are set up, straw men with painted faces, dummies dressed in old tunics, shields planted in the earth like sunflowers. They practice formation charges, shouting battle cries that crack the stillness like thunder. Aldric rides hard, strikes well, but says little. His hands ache, his back is tight. When the captain calls for a break, he walks Mora to a shady patch by the stream and lets her drink. He crouches there, running his fingers through the cool water, watching it dance over the rocks. He remembers bathing here once as a boy, when training first began. The water had felt like ice then. Now it just feels like home. He dips his hands again, brings the chill to his face, and closes his eyes. No one calls for him. No one misses him. He lets the moment stretch. That evening, as they ride back, the sun hangs low and gold between the trees. The light spills like honey through the branches. The others sing a soldier's tune, something about mead and mischief and maidens. Aldric does not join. Instead, he hums an old lullaby his mother used to sing, just beneath his breath, just enough to keep the ache away. Back at the keep, the men feast. Meat, bread, wine. The hall is alive with firelight and noise. Aldric sits at the edge of the long table, picking at a small plate. He watches the others laugh and slap shoulders, pass jugs of ale and boast about wounds. He has wounds too, but they are quiet ones, bruises beneath the skin. He does not speak of them. When the steward calls curfew, he rises with the others, nods once to the captain, and retreats to his chamber. The halls are quieter now. The candles flicker lower. The keep sleeps, piece by piece. In his room, Aldric opens a small wooden chest beneath his bed. Inside are two things: a folded letter he never sent, and a small carved hawk, whittled from yew wood. He holds the hawk in his hand. It was a gift from his little sister before he left. "To watch over you," she had said, placing it in his palm, "so you remember who you are." He places it on the windowsill where the moonlight can see it, and lies back down on the cot. His body is tired, but his heart still beats with questions. He wonders how many nights feel like this. How many wear their armor like a disguise? How many dream of running away and never being found? He does not weep, not tonight, but he does let the silence settle into his chest like a warm blanket. The wind sighs once more, the candle sputters low, and as sleep gently pulls him under, Aldric dreams. Not of battles, not of blood, but of bees buzzing in a sunlit meadow, of bread baking in a clay oven, and the soft sound of laughter from a voice he misses dearly. The morning fog comes thick and slow, curling between the stones of the courtyard like pale fingers searching for rest. Aldric wakes before the bell, as he often does, his breath shallow and even. For a few minutes he lies still and listens to the distant sound of hooves in the stables, the sleepy murmur of stable boys, the soft flap of a loose shutter in the breeze. This early the keep belongs to ghosts and memories. He dresses with care. The fabric of his tunic is coarser now from too many washes. His boots are stiff with dried mud, but he does not complain. Knights are not supposed to complain. The weight of the armor is familiar now, like the quiet ache in his chest. He no longer tries to explain. He moves with the same precision he was taught as a child. Every strap pulled tight, every buckle checked twice. To forget one is to fail them all. When he enters the courtyard, the fog clings to his skin. The others gather slowly, some yawning, some laughing too loudly, others dragging their heels. Today they will spar with real weapons. No blunted swords, no stuffed dummies. Today the bruises will be real. The captain watches them with a quiet stare. His face is marked by too many winters, his mouth a straight line carved into granite. He says little, he doesn't need to. The men fear him, respect him, and no one dares defy the tone in his eyes. Aldric is paired with a boy from the western hills, broad-shouldered, loud, eager. His blade sings when it slices through the air, but his feet are unsure, too quick to rush. They circle each other in the ring, the fog swirling like smoke around their boots. The steel meets with a sharp clang, and for a moment, nothing else exists. Aldric moves like water-controlled, smooth, detached. He blocks, deflects, steps sideways. He does not speak, and he does not strike to win. He strikes to end it. One twist, one sidestep, and the boy is disarmed. His blade clatters to the ground like a fallen thought. The others cheer. The captain nods. Aldric steps back. He feels nothing. Later, in the armory, he sharpens his sword with rhythmic care. Each scrape of the whetstone soothes him more than the food in his belly. Around him, the other knights speak of the tournament coming in the next moon, the grand one, the one where banners from every house will fly, and nobles will watch from high battle, their fingers dripping with drip. Aldric says nothing. He has been told he will enter. He's been told to win. That night, he writes a letter, the same one he has rewritten a dozen times. He writes to his mother, though he never sees them. He tells her about the mist in the forest, about Mora's tired hooves, about the way bread at the keep is always dry, unless you take it straight from the oven. He does not tell her about the dreams, or the way his hands shake when he is alone. He folds the letter and tucks it into the chest beside the wooden hawk. His sister's carving watches him like a guardian. It has no eyes, but it sees everything. The wind is picking up now. Outside the narrow window, the trees lean and whisper secrets to the dark. Aldric lies on his side, knees tucked slightly inward, as if to shield himself from the world. The straw mattress creaks softly beneath him. He closes his eyes, but sleep takes its time. In his dreams he is in a garden, not one from memory, but one from imagination, lush and warm, filled with tall grass and flowering vines. He is not in armor. He is barefoot, running his fingers along a low stone wall covered in moss. The birds sing softly, and a girl laughs nearby. He doesn't recognize her face, but her voice feels like safety. When he wakes, the dream fades like smoke, but the feeling stays, a soft ache in his chest, a quiet hunger for something he has no words for. The next day, he is summoned to the chapel. The chapel sits on the edge of the keep's highest tower, a simple space built from river stone and timber, where prayers rise with the wind and candles flicker under old stained glass. He kneels with the priest murmured blessings over him. The words are well worn. Aldric mouths them, not because he believes they'll help, but because it is what is expected. After the blessing, the priest places a cold hand on his shoulder. Bravery, the old man whispers, is not the absence of fear of myself, but the mastery of it. His voice is thin, like parchment rubbed smooth by time. Aldric nods. But inside he wonders if anyone has truly mastered fear, or if they've just buried it deeper than most can dig. Outside, the sky is low and gray. The clouds stretch like wool across the heavens, heavy with unshed rain. The soldiers march in drills below. The captain's whistle pierces the air like a bird call. Mora waits in the stable, already saddled. Today they ride again. As Aldric mounts his horse, he glances once more at the chapel. A small part of him hopes the blessing will hold. A larger part knows it won't, but he rides anyway, because that's what he was trained to do, because knights keep moving, even when their hearts beg them to stop. The rain begins as they reach the edge of the pine wood, soft at first, like a whisper against a cloak, then stronger, more insistent, falling in long threads that shimmer in the air. The forest takes on a darker hue, the bark of the trees deepening to near black, and the undergrowth glistens with beads of water. The world feels smaller here, wrapped in the hush of dripping branches and the occasional snort of a damp horse. Aldric rides near the back, his hood pulled low. The trail is familiar, carved through the woods by countless patrols. But every curve, every root feels different in the rain. The wet soil gives beneath the hoof, cut blue with a fast hit. Mora is steady. She knows where to place his steps, where the ground shifts. He trusts her No one wishes to be the one caught off guard. Still, the rain mutes the tension. It softens edges, makes the clang of armor sound like distant bells, far removed. After an hour, the captain calls for a pause beneath a stand of oaks, where the canopy thickens and keeps most of the water at bay. They dismount, stretch limbs, pass around bits of dried meat and oat bread. Aldric chews without tasting. He stands apart, one hand resting on Mora's wet mane, watching the trail behind them disappear into the fog. It feels like they're being followed, but not by men, by time, by expectation, by something older than both. When they ride again, the rain slows and the world turns silver. The mist hangs like a curtain through which they pass slowly, wordlessly. The forest seems endless, and Aldric wonders if they'll ever turn around. But eventually they do, circling back toward the keep, boots and hooves caked with mud. That evening, back in the barracks, the squires speak in low tones. One of them cut his hand on a branch and tries not to show it. Another laughs too hard at a joke that isn't funny. The older knights polish their blades, oil their armor, and speak of old battles with the reverence of priests recounting scripture. Aldric listens, but his thoughts drift. He wonders what it would be like to sleep in a bed not made of straw, to live in a place where the wind doesn't out through every crack in the wall, to wake without being told how to live. He finishes his meal early and slips away. No one notices. They rarely do, his feet taken to the battlements again. The rain has stopped, but the stones are slick beneath his boots. From here, he can see the hill rolling off into the dusk, the horizon swallowed by fog. The village below glows faintly with lantern light. Somewhere down there, a child is probably being tucked into bed, warm and safe. He envies them. Behind him, footsteps echo light, unsure. A girl approaches, perhaps 16, with a wooden pail slung at her side. A kitchen helper, by the look of her. She offers a small nod as she passes, not wanting to disturb. Aldric nods back. He notices her fingers are red from scrubbing. Her shoes are soaked through. Still, she hums to herself, quietly, like she's somewhere else in her mind. He watches her disappear down the steps, then closes his eyes and lets the wind press against his face. It smells of wet earth and old stone. It carries with it the scent of something far away, not war, not fear, but peace. A kind he's only tasted in dreams. He does not return to the barracks that night. Instead, he finds his way to the old chapel again. The door creaks on its hinges, and the space inside is dark except for the faint glow of the eternal candle burning low, as it always is. The pews are empty. The air smells of dust and wax. He kneels at the front, not to pray, but simply to be. He sits there for a long while, listening to the silence. The wind outside sighs against the stained glass. A drop of water sinks softly into a bowl near the opening. His heart beats slow. The ache behind his hand is dull. Eventually he speaks, but only barely. Just a whisper, more breath inside. I don't know what I'm doing. The words drift into the dark like feathers. No one answers. But strangely, that's enough. He breathes again, slower now, deeper, and for the first time in many nights, his eyes begin to close. He curls into the corner of the pew and lets the world fall away. When he wakes, dawn has only just begun to reach through the chapel windows. The glass filters the light into faint blues and dusty ambers, scattering it across the floor like pieces of a forgotten dream. Aldric blinks slowly, his body stiff from sleep against the cold wood. But for once, there's no weight in his chest, no shadows in his mind. Just quiet, stillness, peace. He rises gently, careful not to disturb the silence, and steps out into the morning air. The sky is pale and blank, the air is soft against his cheeks. The keep is still asleep, save for a few kitchen fires and the rustle of someone sweeping the courtyard below. His boots make no sound on the wet stone as he walks back to his chamber. Inside, the candle he left the night before has burned down completely. A trail of wax curls across the table like the path of a snail. He changes out of his damp tunic, washes his face with cool water from the basin, and sits by the window. The carved hawk is still there, watching. The light catches in the lines of its wings, and he smiles, just barely. He doesn't have to train this morning. The captain gave them the day for rest, though that word is different to everyone. Some spend it drinking, others will sharpen blades. A few will ride to the village for a small company food, the kind of company no one admits to need. Aldric thinks perhaps they'll walk to the edge of the forest and sit where the sun breaks through the trees. No armor, no soap, just air. And so, after a small meal and a silent nod to the steward, he slips away through the west gate. No one stops him. No one asks. He walks with his cloak drawn over his shoulders, the hood down, so he can feel the warmth of the morning sun. The path to the forest is familiar, but every step feels new without the weight of metal or the pull of duty. The birds are louder here, the wind sweeter. Leaves flutter down like whispers, soft and slow. He finds a low patch of grass beneath an old elm and sits with his back against the trunk. His knees draw up, arms resting loosely over them. The ground is still damp, but he doesn't mind. He closes his eyes, and in that quiet grove he begins to remember. Not the drills, not the blood, but other things. A melody his mother used to hum while kneading dough. The way his sister's curls bounced when she ran down the hillside, barefoot and wild. The smell of late summer sun-warmed wheat, crushed mint underfoot. Bees buzzing around two ripe apples. He remembers the night before he left for training. His father, who rarely spoke more than a few sentences at a time, had placed a hand on Aldric's shoulder and simply said, "You were not born for war, my son, but I know you'll endure it." At the time, he'd taken it as praise. Now he wasn't so sure. He wonders what it would mean to not endure, to step off the path and choose something else, to put down the sword, to carve wood for a living, perhaps, or keep bees, or teach children how to ride ponies through soft grass fields, laughing instead of shouting. His breath deepens. The wind rustles above, soft at his side. A squirrel chitters nearby, darting along a low branch. The world continues, unbothered by O's and armor. Aldric leans his head back, eyes closed, and lets the sun warm his skin. For a long time he doesn't move. Back at the keep, the day wears on. The sky brightens, clouds drifting lazily overhead. In the courtyard, the captain notices Aldric's absence, but says nothing. He knows the boy will return. He always does. But something will be different this time. When Aldric finally rises, the sun is already tipping toward the west. He brushes the leaves from his cloak, stretches, and walks back with the slow steps of someone who has made a decision, even if he doesn't yet know what it is. His heart feels lighter, not free, not yet, but lighter. He returns through the side gate, unnoticed. No one asks where he's been. In his chamber, he removes the wooden hawk from the windowsill and holds it in his palm. Its wings are chipped at the tips, but still strong. He slips it into a small pouch at his belt. That night, the fires burn brighter in the great hall. A bard has come through, lute slung across his back, and sings low songs about distant seas and kingdoms lost to time. The men cheer and drink, some pounding their cups in rhythm, others dozing quietly with full bellies and warmer thoughts than usual. Aldric sits near the hearth, closer than he ever has before. He listens, really listens. The bard's voice is soft, warm, smooth, like traveling hands numbering. There's something about it that reminds Aldric of the garden in his dreams imagined one. The place without war, the place where things still bloom. He closes his eyes and lets the warmth of the fire wash over him. His sword remains sheathed at his side, but for tonight it feels far away. The hearth's glow flickers gently across Aldric's face, casting soft shadows beneath his eyes. The bard's song shifts into something slower, now an old lullaby from the eastern coasts, where the moon rises low and orange over the sea. The melody drifts like a feather through the warm air, wrapping around the flickering flames, lulling even the most hardened soldiers into a hush. For a few breaths, the hall feels less like a keep and more like a cradle. Aldric watches the firelight dance along the rim of his cup. His hands, though still young, bear the quiet signs of the life he's lived, the small scars across his knuckles, the faint calluses on his palms, the way his grip softens when no one's looking. He looks down at them now, as if seeing them for the first time. He wonders what these hands might build if they weren't made for breaking. Around him, the murmurs grow quiet. One by one, the men drift off to their chambers, laughter giving way to yawns, footsteps trailing down the stone corridors like the last notes of a song. Aldric stays where he is. He doesn't want the warmth to end just yet. The flicker of the flames, the hush of the stone walls, the soft creak of the bard's stool as he tunes his strings again. Eventually the bard notices him sitting alone. "You've the look of someone who carries too much," the old man says, his voice low and kind, not asking a question, just offering a space. Aldric looks up, startled, not because he was spoken to, but because someone saw him. "I was trained to carry," he says simply. The bard nods, smiling gently. Even a strong cart breaks if it's never unburdened. Aldric doesn't respond, but something in his chest loosens. The bard stands, places his lute into its worn leather case, and turns to go. Just before he disappears into the darkness of the corridor, he pauses. "Rest well, knight. The world needs swords, but it also needs shepherds." And then he is gone. Aldric stays by the hearth until the last ember curls into ash. Only then does he rise, slowly, quietly, and return to his chamber. The walk through the empty keep is familiar, comforting. The hush of the stones, the chill of the air, the moonlight pressing through the high windows in long, pale stripes. He removes his belt, sets the sword gently on the table, and draws the wool blanket up over his shoulders. The cot creaks under his weight. The candle beside him has only just been lit. He lets it burn. Tonight he does not fear sleep. Tonight, the quiet feels like a gift, and so his eyes close. And in the soft drift of dreams, he is not a knight. He is not a soldier. He is only Aldric, running barefoot through tall grass, lifting his sister into his arms beneath the branches of an old apple tree, bees humming lazily around them, a basket of bread tucked into a checkered cloth nearby. No armor, no weight, only light, only warmth, only home. The dream fades slowly, gently, like fog lifting from a lake. When morning comes, the sun peeks through his window, brighter than usual. He stretches, his joints creaking softly. A thin sliver of birdsong filters in, cheerful and low. He rises without rush. There's no urgency today, no assignment pinned to the door, no voice calling him to the yard. He takes his time washing, combing his hair, retying the frayed belt at his waist. The wooden hawk returns to his pocket. He carries it now like a charm, a weightless one, a reminder. In the dining hall, the morning meal is quiet. Bread, hard cheese, watered ale. The others speak softly, voices lowered by sleep and softened by the bard's visit the night before. Even the captain walks with a slower pace this morning. He meets Aldric's eye across the room. They nod once to each other. No words, just understanding. After the meal, Aldric returns to the yard not for drills, but to watch the new squires train. They're younger than he was when he first arrived, all elbows and fear and 2 loose tunics. Their swords clatter awkwardly. Their feet slip on the wet stone. He remembers those days, how heavy the wooden sword felt, how loud the captain's voice seemed, how desperately he wanted to be seen as brave. He walks over quietly and picks up a fallen training blade. One of the boys stares up at him, wide-eyed. "Loosen your grip," Aldric says, offering the blade back. "You're trying too hard to look strong. Let the sword do some of the work." The boy nods, his cheeks pink with effort. Aldric doesn't stay long, just enough to offer a few tips, a few gentle words. He doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't strike, just listens, corrects, encourages, the same way no one did for him. He walks the perimeter of the yard after that, watching the trees sway in the wind beyond the walls. He thinks of writing another letter, one he might actually send this time. He doesn't know what it would say yet, but he knows the words would come. He just needs to listen.
The sky above the keep rolls with slow, high clouds, long and pale like stretched wool. The sun filters through them in muted gold, brushing the towers with warmth that doesn't quite reach the stones. Aldric makes his way up to the watchtower after the yard grows too loud for his liking. The stairs spiral higher than he remembers, but each step feels easier than the last. Perhaps it's the sleep, perhaps it's the lightness that follows when something heavy begins to lift from the chest. At the top, the view stretches out in every direction, rolling hills, green and brown with spring's slow awakening, winding paths that vanish into trees, smoke rising from the small houses of the village beyond the fields. He watches it all in silence, arms resting on the cold stone, his breath slow and steady. There's a stillness to the world that can only be found from a distance. Down below, there are duties, questions, noise. But up here, there is only wind. Only the occasional cry of a hawk passing overhead. It makes him wonder why he's stayed grounded so long, why he's waited for someone else to tell him what to do, what to become, why he's never climbed higher before now. A quiet knock on stone behind him draws his attention. It's the steward, holding a small parchment, his expression unreadable. He hands it over wordlessly and nods once before disappearing back down the stairs. Aldric opens the seal slowly. It's from the captain. Simple message. The tournament has been confirmed. Riders from other keeps will arrive in less than a week. Been named to compete in the sword trials and mounted combat. A place of honor, a chance to rise in rank, to be seen. He folds the parchment and holds it in his hand for a long time. It should have thrilled him, even frightened him. But instead, he just feels quiet, like standing on a shoreline after the tide has gone out. He places the parchment in the small satchel at his waist and turns back to the view. Somewhere out there, a boy not much younger than him is chopping wood beside a cottage. Another is learning to bake, another to fish, another to paint. All living lives that don't require steel. That don't demand silence. He lingers until the sun dips low, then makes his way down to the stables. Mora whinnies softly when she sees him, her ears perking. He brushes her coat with slow, even strokes, murmuring quiet words that don't need to mean anything. Just sound, just comfort. She leans into him as he works, eyes half closed. "You're not just a warhorse, are you?" he whispers. "You'd rather be trotting through orchards. I think I would too." When she's groomed and fed, he leaves the stable and walks toward the outer garden, what little one there is. It's mostly herbs, practical and hardy. Rosemary, sage, and wild onions. But tucked in the far corner, there's a single rose bush, its branches twisted and half-bare from years of neglect. Still, one bloom clings stubbornly to life, a soft red petal curling in the breeze. He crouches by it, brushing away a few weeds. No one ever tends to this patch. It's outside the captain's schedule, beyond the steward's eyes. It survives simply because it chooses to. He smiles at that, a flower no one asked for, growing anyway. That night, he eats by the fire again, though the bard is gone. The silence is thicker, the hall dimmer. The men talk less. Maybe they feel the coming of the tournament in their bones. Or maybe they just miss the music. Aldric doesn't stay long. He finishes his bread, dips the crust into broth, and rises before the others begin their boasting. He walks the quiet halls, candle in hand, letting the flame cast soft light against the stone. In the stillness, he hears only the echo of his own footsteps and the faint dripping of water from some unseen pipe far above. The keep feels ancient at night, like a slumbering beast, slow to stir. In his chamber, he writes again, but not to his mother. This time the letter is for himself. He writes about the garden, and Mora, and the feeling of the wind on his face. He writes about the fear he still feels, the thoughts he still hides, but also about the calm that he's begun to bloom in the root joint. He folds the letter and places it beside the hearth. Then, without lighting the candle, he crawls beneath the blanket and lets the darkness wrap around him. The moonlight spills in silver lines across the stone floor.
The next days pass like drifting clouds, quiet, soft, predictable. Each one begins with the same rising sun bleeding orange light through the narrow windows, the same cool basin of water for washing, the same measured steps across stone toward training grounds and small duties. But something in Aldric has shifted. He feels it even when no one else notices. A slowness in his anger, a softness behind his gaze. He moves through the halls with a kind of thoughtful patience, as if weighing every moment in his hands before letting it pass. He practices for the tournament, yes, but not like the others. Where the rest strike with fury, eager to impress, to dominate, Aldric moves with controlled grace. Every motion is clean, every step deliberate. The captain observes from the shadow of the tower wall, arms folded. He says nothing, but Aldric feels his approval in the way the man lingers longer than usual. Aldric sharpens his sword on the whetstone one evening as twilight seeps in through the windows, and the rhythm of it calms him more than he expects. The sound steady, even, quiet feels like breathing. Not the breath of panic, not the breath before a battle cry, but the kind of breath you take when no one's watching, the kind that lets you settle deeper into yourself. He notices one of the squires watching him from the corner, hesitant. "Would you like to try?" Aldric asks, nodding toward the stone. The boy looks surprised, then nods, moves closer. Aldric shows him how to hold the blade, how to angle it gently, how to feel the metal within it, and then it drags. The boy follows his guidance, and when they finish, there's a silence that feels whole, complete, as if something has been passed on, not through words, but through presence. Later that night, Aldric sits alone near the chapel again. The stars above are scattered across the sky like scattered ash, faint but glowing. He leans against the outer wall, watching the heavens, listening to the rustling of leaves. Insects hum softly in the grass. Somewhere far off an owl calls. The world is so vast, he thinks, and yet here I am, in this one small corner of it, breathing quietly and watching the stars. He doesn't think of winning or losing, of titles or fear. He thinks only of the moment, of how the cold stone feels against his back, how the breeze plays with the hem of his tunic, of the lightness inside his chest, a space where fear once lived, now replaced by something slower, kinder. The day of the tournament arrives under a sky washed clean by rain. The banners are bright, strung along the walls in crisp lines. Strangers arrive on horseback, armor polished, crests sewn onto cloaks. There is music in the yard pipes and drums, a soft tambourine keeping rhythm. The air carries the scent of fresh bread, hot oil, spiced wine. The keep feels alive in a way it rarely does. Aldric dresses in silence. His armor is clean, but not gleaming. It bears its wear with dignity. His wooden hawk is tucked beneath the collar of his shirt, tied to a simple leather cord. He fastens his cloak slowly, fingers lingering on the knot. The yard is cool by mid-morning. Lords and ladies sit and raise stand. Soldiers line the ring. The other knights stand tall, faces painted with pride or nerve or something in between. Aldric finds his place among them and breathes in deep. He watches the cloud shift across. No moment his name calls. He steps forward. The sparring ring is wide, roped off with thick cords. His opponent is older, broader, a knight from a southern outpost, known for speed and showmanship. The crowd whispers. Aldric hears none of it. He draws his sword slowly, with purpose, not to dazzle, not to intimidate, but to be present. The duel begins with a signal, a soft call from the judge. Steel meets steel. The rhythm is fast at first, the other knights striking with flourish and fury, each blow meant to rattle and impress. Aldric does not meet force with force. He absorbs, redirects, waits. The weight of the strikes rings through his arms, but he does not falter. Then, with a single, calm movement, he steps to the left, parries high, and with the flat of his blade, taps the other's chest. A clean, undeniable point. The crowd falls quiet. Then, slowly, they applaud. But Aldric does not bow. He simply lowers his sword and nods once to his opponent. No grin, no arrogance, just respect. The other knight looks at him, surprised, then nods back. He walks back to his place in the line, sheathing his blade. Someone claps him on the shoulder. Another offers a thumbs up. But Aldric isn't listening. He is breathing. And for the first time since he was a boy, he feels like himself. The afternoon unfolds in a gentle whirl of movement and murmur. More matches are fought. More blades meet in practiced rhythm. The cheers rise and fall like waves, but to Aldric they are distant sounds soft by the stillness feels like a prison. When his name is called a second time for the mounted round, he rises slowly and walks to the stables. Mora is already saddled, her coat brushed, her mane neatly braided with the colors of his keep. She snorts when she sees him, tapping her hoof against the stone floor. He places a hand gently on her flank, smoothing down a loose braid. "Just you and me," he murmurs, and there is a quiet affection in his voice that wasn't there months ago. He mounts with practiced grace, settling into the saddle like a breath falling into rhythm. The sky above is bright now, clouds peel back like curtains, and the sun glints off the polished helms of those watching. The course is simple ride, strike the hanging rings with a lance, then dismount and cross the final barrier on foot with sword in hand. A test of both rider and man. The trumpet sounds. Mora bolts forward, not recklessly, but with smooth, pulsing strides that match Aldric's heartbeat. The wind presses against his cheeks. He lowers his lance, steady hands aiming not at the rings, but through them. The first ring clinks gently as the lance tip passes clean through. Then the second. Then the third. He does not miss. He slows Mora at the final stretch, dismounts with a quiet hop, and draws his sword again. The barrier is a low wooden gate meant to mimic the castle bridge. Two straw dummies wait on the other side, armed with wooden blades. The two swift leaps twice. Precise pounding brings them both down. The crowd applauds louder this time, but he does not hear their praise, only their sound. Tapping, like wind through winds. He sheathes his sword, walks to Mora, and pats her gently behind the ear. "Well done," he whispers. She nudges his chest in response. By evening, the shadows stretch long across the stones. The final matches are over. Prizes are named. Some knights cheer with raised arms. Others clench their fists in silent defeat. Aldric's name is called twice: first for excellence in technique, second for calm under pressure. The captain offers him a nod, a rare small smile. A coin pouch is placed in his palm. He bows his head out of courtesy, then walks away. He does not linger in the feast that follows. The laughter, the heavy drink, the endless talk of who bested who. It all swirls like smoke above the firelight. Instead, he makes his way to the outer wall, where the quiet lives. From there, he watches the sky deepen into blue. He unties the leather cord from around his neck and holds the carved hawk in both hands. The wood is warm from his chest, smooth from the years. He places it on the stone ledge and leans forward slightly, resting his arms beside it. His thoughts drift not to glory or to fear, but to softness, to his sister's laugh, to honey on fresh bread, to the sound Mora's hooves make when walking slowly over dry earth. He does not need the noise anymore. He only needs the stillness. Far below, a girl's voice echoes faintly from the village singing something, maybe just a tune, maybe a story. It rises gently, then fades with a breeze. Aldric smiles, not wide, not sharp, but softly. He picks up the hawk again, puts it back into his pouch, and turns toward the stairs. There are no more tournaments for now. No more battles waiting on the other side of sunrise. Just quiet days. And perhaps the beginning of something else. The days that follow move like soft ripples on a still pond. The tournament fades behind him like a passing storm, leaving only echoes and swept straw. The visiting knights depart one by one, their cloaks trailing behind as they ride off toward their own distant keeps and forgotten promises. The courtyard is quieter again, less color in the air, less clatter in the halls. But Aldric doesn't mind the silence. In fact, he welcomes it. It feels like a deep breath after holding one too long. He wakes each morning without being called, not out of duty now, but out of habit. His body still remembers the rhythm, but his spirit is calmer. The dread is gone. Not because the world has changed, but because he has softened around its edges, like a river smoothing the face of stone. He walks the outer paths more often, where the wildflowers push between cracks in the wall and moss clings to the shady corners. He watches bees move lazily from bloom to bloom, wings humming like lullabies too old for words. Sometimes he takes his meals alone in the kitchen rather than the hall, sitting by the warmth of the hearth while the cook chops herbs nearby. She hums a tune he doesn't recognize, but it feels familiar in a strange, wordless way. He eats slowly now, chewing each bite as if it matters. There's no rush, no one to impress. The bread tastes more real when you're not bracing for the next command. One afternoon, while walking near the chapel stone, he notices the road shaped again. It has begun to glow like some flowery moss, delicate, blushing red at the tip. He moves to clear away the dry twigs and old leaves that have gathered at his roots. His fingers work gently, brushing the earth with care. When he stands, he sees the steward watching from the doorway. The old man nods once and disappears inside without a word. But Aldric feels it. A silent approval, not as a knight, not as a warrior, but as a boy who knelt for a flower. That evening, he finds himself drawn back to the watchtower. The air is cool as the sun sinks lower, and the horizon glows like warm gold poured over velvet. He watches the fields below sway like waves beneath the wind. Far off, smoke curls from the thatched homes of the village, and tiny figures move about in evening routines, fetching water, herding goats, calling children indoors. The scene feels distant and intimate all at once, like watching a dream you once lived in. He pulls the wooden hawk from his pouch and holds it up against the fading light. The shadows slip across its carved feathers, and he runs a thumb along its wing. "You've done well," he says softly, voice nearly lost to the breeze. "You kept me here." Then, slowly, he places it on the ledge beside him, not to leave it behind, but to let it rest, like a sentry watching the sunset. When night falls, he returns to his chamber and lights a candle. The flame flickers gently, casting a glow that sways on the walls. He takes a sheet of parchment, dips the quill, and writes again. This letter is different from the others. He writes it to no one in particular. It's more of a reflection than a message filled with quiet thoughts, not polished words. He writes of the wind in the stone, the softness of the horse's breath, the silence in his bones, the ache he carries, and the way it sought him in the quiet places. When the candle burns low, he folds the parchment and places it in the chest for the others. He does not drop it. Some words are meant to be read someday. He undresses slowly, folding each piece of cloth with care. He slips under the woolen blanket and lies on his side, face to the window, where a sliver of moon casts pale light over the sill. His breathing deepens. The night is still. There are no voices in the corridor, no echoes of boots. Just the sound of leaves brushing stone outside and the occasional creak of the keep settling into its sleep. His eyes flutter once, then close. And in his dreams he is walking not into battle, not into fire, but through tall grass in the early morning. dew glistening on his boots, birds wheeling above in slow circles. There is no sword at his side, no weight on his shoulders, only the quiet rhythm of his own footsteps, and the feeling that, finally, he is free. The morning light crept into Aldric's chamber like a soft breath, brushing against the stone floor in faint golden strokes. He did not rise all at once. He lingered beneath the woolen blanket, his eyes half closed, listening to the hush of the keep as it yawned into waking. Somewhere down the corridor, a door clicked open. Below, in the courtyard, the faint clatter of buckets and hooves echoed up through the walls. The world was beginning again, but this time it didn't feel like a summons. It felt like an invitation. He sat up slowly, stretching his arms over his head, his back cracking quietly in the stillness. There was no voice calling for him, no orders tucked beneath the door, just the cool touch of morning air and the soft sway of the curtain beside the window. He stood, walked barefoot to the basin, and washed his face in silence. The water was cold but bracing. He let it run down his neck, let it wake the places still caught in sleep. He dressed without hurry. Not in armor, not today. Just a soft linen tunic, simple trousers, and his worn boots scuffed at the toes from long rides and longer battles. He tied his belt loosely, letting the ends hang where they may. The wooden hawk still rested in his chest box, but this time he took it out and tied it to the leather cord around his neck. It hung just beneath his collarbone, hidden from the world, but close to his heart. Outside, the sun had begun its slow climb over the trees, lighting the sky in soft hues of peach and pale blue. The air smelled faintly of bread and smoke, and the courtyard was alive with gentle motion. Maids crossed with pails. A stable hand led a drowsy mule toward the watering trough. A young knight laughed at something under his breath, his sword sheathed for once. Aldric walked the outer path of the keep, his steps slow, steady. The dew still clung to the grass at the edges of the stone, catching the light like scattered beads. He paused at the rosebush now thick with green and bent to brush away a few fallen leaves from its roots. 3 small blossoms had bloomed overnight, one red, one soft pink, and one still curled tightly in its bud. He smiled, not with pride, but with quiet affection. Growth did not need to be loud. He continued on through the old gate and down the winding trail toward the fields. It was a path he'd ridden many times, but walking it felt different. The breeze touched his face more freely. The birds called out to one another in their secret morning code. The world was awake, but not rushed. It moved slowly, as if savoring its own breath. As he passed the outer pasture, Mora lifted her head. Her ears flicked, and she trotted over, pressing her muzzle into his chest. He scratched behind her jaw, and for a long moment they simply stood, their horse and man, wrapped in the silence of shared understanding. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Mora's warmth against his ribs said enough. The trail led him to a quiet overlook beyond the orchard wall, where the land spilled downward into the valley. From here, the village looked like a scattering of Toy's tiny rooftops, smoke trails, people who looked no bigger than ants going about their day. Aldric sat on the low stone ledge and let the view wash over him. He felt no longing, only observation. The world below spun in its own gentle rhythm, and for once he didn't feel apart from it. He closed his eyes and breathed in. The air carried the scent of crushed clover and damp soil. Far off, a flock of birds lifted from a tree all at once, wings beating in unison like a single breath. His shoulders soft, his jaw loosened. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of the things he'd never had time to notice. Eventually he made his way back, not because he had to, but because it felt right. The sun was higher now, casting longer shadows behind the towers. The guards at the gate nodded as he passed. One of them offered a quiet smile, small but real. Aldric returned it. Inside the keep, he walked the halls with a different weight in his steps. Not heavy, not burdened, but grounded. He passed the chapel and paused at its open doors. The eternal candle still flickered at the altar, flame trembling in the light breeze. He didn't enter, but he stood in the threshold for a time, one hand resting on the stone frame. He let the warmth from the flame drift toward him, and imagined what it might be like to live with that kind of quiet faith. Not in gods or battles, but in moments, in breath, in peace. Back in his chamber, he opened a small wooden chest at the foot of his bed. The letters were still there, stacked neatly, unsent, unspoken, but he didn't feel the need to add another today. Instead, he lifted the hawk carving from his chest and placed it on the windowsill. This time he didn't turn it toward the room, but toward the sky, toward the place where the light came from, toward the place things moved without fear. He sat on the edge of his cot and watched the wind play with the ivy outside the window, and he whispered to no one in particular, "I think I'm ready now." Then he lay back, hands folded across his chest, eyes half closed. The keep breathed around him. The wind rustled the curtain. The hawk faced the sky. And Aldric, the boy beneath the armor, rested. The days began to fold into one another, not in the way of monotony, but like soft linen sheets, layer upon layer of small, meaningful stillness. Each morning, Aldric woke with the first light, his body unhurried, his mind clear. There were no more drills waiting, no more sharpened expectations. The captain had assigned him to rest detail, after the tournament a reward, perhaps, or a subtle recognition that something inside the young knight had shifted. Either way, Aldric accepted it gladly. He filled his time with small, almost invisible tasks, mending saddle straps in the stables, helping the cook grind herbs and carry sacks of flour, walking the orchard wall to check for loose stones. No task was beneath him now, and none were done with the anxious weight of performance. He did them simply, slowly, with the care of someone learning to live rather than to survive. One afternoon, while carrying a small pail of water to the rosebush garden, he heard music echoing through the archway behind the chapel. Not courtly music, no lute or harp, but a simple whistle, rising and falling like the call of a morning bird. He followed it out of curiosity and found one of the youngest squires sitting on the edge of the well, his feet swinging just above the grass. The boy stopped when he saw Aldric and stood quickly, nearly spilling his satchel. "Sorry, sir," the boy said, bowing clumsily. Aldric held up a hand. "There's no need for that." The boy blinked, unsure. "You whistle beautifully," Aldric said, smiling. "Please don't stop on my account." The boy sat back down slowly, unsure if it was a trick. But Aldric only nodded once and continued past, letting the melody start again behind him. It trailed him like a ribbon on the wind. That evening, Aldric took his bread and cheese out to the old battlements, where the stone was warm from the day's sun, and the view stretched wide across the twilight hills. He ate slowly, tearing each piece gently, letting the flavors linger. Below him, smoke drifted from the village chimneys, soft and gray. Somewhere nearby, a raven called, its voice echoing against the stone with the gravity of time itself. He leaned forward and placed his elbows on the wall, letting the cool air touch his face. The hawk carving still hung beneath his shirt, a quiet weight at his chest. He pressed his palm over it now and closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence was full of all the words he'd never said, and didn't need to anymore. When darkness fell fully, he returned to his room. The candle on his table flickered, throwing long, gentle shadows onto the stone walls. He undressed slowly, folding his tunic and setting his boots beneath the bench. He stood at the window for a time, watching the stars begin to prick the sky first one, then another, then a scatter like grains of salt across deep velvet. The world felt impossibly large at night, yet so intimately close. He thought of how many others were looking up at the same stars. Peasants, kings, travelers, shepherds. All of them breathing, all of them dreaming. He pulled the wooden chest close and opened the lid. The stack of letters sat neatly unmoving. He reached for one, an old one, written early in his training. He unfolded it and read the words slowly, as if they'd been written by someone else. In a way, they had. The boy who wrote them was still him, but changed. Hardened then, softer now. The letters spoke of fear, of failure, of long nights and longer days. It asked questions no one had answered. Aldric folded it back and placed it carefully underneath the others. Then he took a fresh page and began to write not to his mother, not to himself, but to that version of him, the one who had stayed up through the cold, the one who had cried quietly into a blanket and said nothing, the one who thought no one saw him. "I see you," he wrote. "I always have." He wrote slowly, deliberately, each word like a warm hand pressed to a younger shoulder. "You were always brave, even when you didn't feel like it, especially then." When the letter was done, he folded it and placed it on top of a stack. He closed the lid, blew out the candle, let the night swallow the room whole. And when he laid down, the darkness did not feel empty. It felt like peace. The next morning arrived in soft gray, the kind of overcast sky that holds the quiet promise of rain but offers none. The clouds drifted slowly overhead like tired ships, sails full of wind but no destination. Aldric woke to the distant patter of doves nesting near the rafters. Their cooes filtered down through the stone like echoes of a dream he couldn't quite remember, though it felt gentle, full of green fields, maybe, or warm bread. He sat up, running a hand over his face, and then paused. There was no urgency in his limbs, no call to battle. His shoulders didn't carry the weight they once had, though the memories still lingered silent and folded into him like seams. He rose, dressed simply, and stepped into the hallway, where the morning lantern still flickered against damp stone. Outside, the keep was hushed. The air was cool and still, and everything smelled faintly of wet earth and morning bread. He passed the kitchens just as a maid opened the shutters, and the scent of flour and herbs rolled out into the air. She saw him and nodded, her sleeves dusted and white, her eyes warm but not surprised. He nodded back, then continued walking with no destination in mind. He found himself wandering toward the garden again, the old patch behind the chapel wall, where the wild roses had now begun to bloom with quiet insistence. They had taken to the crumbling stone like it was made for them, their roots finding cracks, their stems winding up the arch. Dozens of blossoms now, pink and pale red, soft to the eye and trembling in the breeze. He knelt beside them and plucked a few weeds with slow fingers, not because he had to, but because he wanted to give the roses room to breathe. As he worked, he felt someone approach. Their steps were soft, cautious. He looked up and saw the boy from the young squire who had once whistled when he thought no one heard. "Sir Aldric?" the boy asked, holding a small bundle of cloth. Aldric brushed his hands on his tunic and stood. "Just Aldric is fine." The boy hesitated. Then, quietly, he held out the bundle. Inside it was a little wooden carving. A bird unfinished, the edges still rough, the wings barely shaped. "I was trying to make a hawk," the boy said, shyly. "Like the one you wear. But I don't think I'm very good yet." Aldric took it carefully, holding it in his palm as if it were something fragile. "It's more than good," he said softly. "It's brave." The boy looked up. "Brave?" He nodded. "To try. To begin. That's where all the courage lives." The boy's mouth curved into a small, uncertain smile. "Would you show me how to finish it sometime?" "I'd like that," Aldric said. They stood there a moment longer, the garden rustling quietly around them, the breeze passing between the rose petals like a breath between sentences. Then the boy left, light-footed, his shoulders taller than when he came. Aldric remained. He looked down at the half-formed bird, feeling the weight of it, not in his hand, but in his heart. It reminded him of something, of someone, himself perhaps, years ago. A shape still forming, still learning how to fly. That afternoon he returned to the orchard. The trees there had begun to thicken with leaves, casting long shadows on the mossy ground below. He walked between the trunks with Mora, her reins loose in his hands, her steps unhurried. The two of them moved together like old friends who no longer needed to speak. At one point he stopped and let her graze, leaning his back against the rough bark of an apple tree. Overhead, birds darted between the branches, wings flashing pale and quick. The sky above was still gray, but the kind of gray that holds comfort, a blanket rather than a warning. He sat there for what felt like an hour, watching the rhythm of the orchard. He picked up a fallen twig and began to carve idly, shaving the bark in small curls, letting his hands move without thinking. The shape didn't matter. The motion did. It was calming, meditative, a return to something he had almost forgotten, the joy of doing without needing. When he finally returned to the keep, the sun had begun to sink behind the western hills, tinting the clouds with a subtle wash of violet and gold. The torches in the courtyard were being lit, their flames flickering against the walls like fireflies caught in stone. He passed a few guards on the steps. They greeted him now with smiles instead of stares, not out of duty, but out of something like familiarity, maybe even respect. That evening, in his chamber, Aldric laid the unfinished carving on his desk beside the first hawk. The two birds sat side by side, one rough, one smooth, one just beginning, and one already shaped by years of wear. Together they looked like a story told in silence. He lit the candle and opened a small chest of letters. He didn't write this time. He simply sat with them, let his fingers trace the folded corners, the faded ink. These pages were not cries for help anymore. They were memories, markers. proof that he had walked through the fire and come out the other side quieter, but whole. He closed the chest, blew out the candle, crawled into bed. And as he lay back, watching the faint flicker of moonlight on the ceiling, he thought of the garden, of the young squire, of the weightless hush of the orchard. And he smiled. Then he slept. The nights had grown warmer, and with them came a different kind of stillness, not the hush of winter's sleep, but the soft stirrings of a world beginning to bloom again. Aldric no longer pulled the wool blanket tightly to his chin. Instead, he let the cool edge of air move over his skin, letting the breeze from the open window brush against his arms like a lullaby whispered by the wind itself. The scent of distant lavender drifted in, mingling with the clean, warm smell of stone and sun-dried linen. Sleep came quickly now and stayed gently through the night. By morning, he rose with a stretch and a quiet yawn. The sky outside had softened into that early blue that almost looked silver, and the birds were already awake, their songs weaving together like threads across the orchard. He sat on the edge of the bed and ran a hand through his hair, not to tame it, but simply to feel something familiar. His eyes drifted to the small desk where the two carved birds sat, one whole, one waiting. They felt like companions now, not symbols of burden, but of becoming. He spent the early hours walking the narrow trail just beyond the outer stables, a path that wound along the low ridge and overlooked the distant marshes. Few others ever came this way, which made it all the more precious. The ground was soft from recent rain, and each step released the scent of earth and roots. He paused often, listening to the breeze whisper through the reeds and watching the slow dance of dragonflies above the water. One perched on a blade of grass near his boot, its wings glinting like glass touched by firelight. Further along the trail, he found a small patch of wild mint growing where a stream met the stones. He knelt and pinched off a few leaves, rubbing them between his fingers, breathing in their clean sharpness. The smell reminded him of the old healer who once came through the keep, an elderly woman with laughing eyes and fingers stained green from herbs. She had made teas that smelled just like this, served with honey in rough clay cups. He could almost hear her voice now, warm and worn like old leather, saying, "Breathe deep, lad. It'll clear the dust from your heart." So he breathed in again, and it did. When he returned to the keep, he didn't go straight inside. Instead, he stopped near the east tower, where the wall caught the morning light in full. He sat on the low edge and let the sun soak into his shoulders, his legs swinging gently over the side, like a child at rest. He pulled the unfinished bird from his pouch, along with a small knife he'd begun keeping in his belt, not for battle, but for shaping wood. With patient hands, he began to carve. The motion came slowly at first, each stroke thoughtful, deliberate. He didn't rush. He didn't try to finish it in one sitting. The act was enough. The feeling of bark flaking away, the soft sound of blade over grain. Little by little, the wings took form. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but honestly. And that was what mattered now. As he worked, a few of the younger squires passed by below, laughing among themselves, carrying bundles of practice shields and training lances. One of them called out his name, just Aldric, not Seer, and waved. He lifted a hand in return, smiling without needing to force it. The boys kept walking, their voices fading into the hum of the yard, and Aldric returned to his carving, letting the day stretch out like a cat in the sun. Later, near the kitchens, He found the boy again, the same one who had given him the half-shaped bird. The child was sitting by a bucket of peeled root vegetables, legs tucked beneath him, sleeves rolled up and stained. When he saw Aldric approach, he stood quickly, brushing at his tunic with the back of his hand. "I've been practicing," the boy said, eyes bright. "I made a fox this time." He held it up. The shape was rough, ears uneven, tail too thick. But it was unmistakably a fox. "It's clever," Aldric said, crouching beside him, "just like a real one." The boy beamed. They sat together in the shade, carving and peeling, neither of them rushing to speak. The silence was comfortable, filled with the simple sounds of wood cracking, vegetables thudding into a waiting pot, and the occasional bird call from the rafters above. For a time, the world seemed to shrink to this small patch of earth, where nothing else was needed but company and slow hands. When the sun began to dip, Aldric returned to his room. The light through the window had turned amber, casting soft golden bars across the floor. He placed a new bird beside the first, both now whole, not identical, but kindred. He stood there a while, just watching them, letting their quiet presence speak to something deep in his chest. That night he lit the candle early, not to write, but simply to sit beside it, watching the flame sway and shrink with every breath of air. The letters in the chest remained untouched. He didn't need to add to them tonight. He didn't need to look backward or forward. The present in its gentle stillness was enough. When he finally lay down, he did so with a slow, satisfied breath. No armor on the wall, no sword at the bedside. Just the soft creak of the cot, the whisper of wind through ivy, and the knowledge that peace, once a stranger, had become something he could welcome by name. Sleep took him gently, and the birds, carved and quiet, kept watch. The days passed not with fanfare, but with rhythm. Slow, steady, familiar like the turning of a wheel, or the drip of rain from a wooden eave. Aldric no longer marked time by drills or inspections, by the clash of blade on blade. Instead, he marked it by the changing light across his chamber wall, the way the roses opened wider each morning, the sound of the orchard wind brushing through the stone arches above the courtyard. These moments, once unnoticed, had become the threads that wove his world. He spent more time in the orchard now. The trees were thick with leaves, their branches low and full of early fruit. Sometimes he would walk beneath them with his boots off, letting the grass cool his steps. Other times he simply sat with his back against the trunk of an old apple tree, carving or sketching idle lines into a strip of bark. Mora grazed nearby, never wandering far, always within reach of his voice. She had grown softer too, or maybe he had finally learned to match her pace. One afternoon, as he sat beneath that same tree, the sky heavy with the quiet blue before summer rain, he thought of the first time he had held a sword. He had been no older than the squire now learning to carve. His hands had trembled with the weight of it, not because the blade was heavy, but because of what it meant. That sword had never truly felt like his. Not really. It had belonged to duty, to fear, to the need to prove something. He reached down and ran his fingers through the clover blooming beside the tree's roots. The petals were soft and white, shaped like tiny bells. He plucked one and turned it in his hand. It was more delicate than any steel, yet somehow stronger, resilient enough to grow in the shadow of something so large. That night, a light rain began to fall, tapping gently against the shutters of the keep. Aldric sat by his window, the candle flickering beside him, and watched the drops slide down the glass in winding, unpredictable lines. Each one traced its own story across the pane, some slow, some quick, all pulled by gravity and chance. He imagined his own life as one of those droplets, no longer falling straight, but curving, bending, following a path he never would have chosen before. He opened the chest and chose a letter at random. This one had been written in the cold months, when the snow pressed against the windows and the air in the halls turned brittle. The words were sharp, then full of questions, of wondering whether he belonged here, whether he had what it took. He read the lines slowly, not with shame, but with gentleness. He honored that younger self for surviving, for enduring when the silence was heavy and hope was a stranger. Then carefully he folded the letter back and placed it beneath the others. He didn't need to answer those questions now. The answers were not in words. They were in the way he walked without armor, in the way he smiled when the squire showed him a carving, in the stillness that filled his chest when he watched the sky change color. A knock came at the door, soft, tentative. "Come," he said. The door creaked open, and the boy peeked inside, cradling a thin piece of wood in his hands. "I finished it," he said. Aldric motioned him in, and the boy crossed the stone floor on light feet. He held out the carving another bird, this one smaller, more detailed. The wings were uneven, but the eyes had depth. It was not perfect. It was alive. Aldric turned it in his hand, his thumb brushing the grooves with care. "You did well," he said. "You gave it a soul." The boy beamed. "I think I want to carve animals. Maybe sell them one day." "You should," Aldric said, and he meant it with every part of himself. The world needs more things made with care. The boy left the room a few minutes later, walking taller than he had when he entered, and Aldric, still holding the small bird, placed it beside his others on the windowsill. 3 now. 3 different hands. 3 different hearts. The candle flickered lower. The rain thickened, now a soft thrum on the roof above. He drew the blanket over his legs and sat with his thoughts, letting the sound of water lull his mind into rest. No need for parchment tonight. No need for memory. Only this quiet evening, this quiet breath, this quiet life he was finally beginning to call his own. Sleep found him before he realized it. His head tilted slightly, his eyes fluttered shut. The candle burned itself down to a stub, and outside the window the rain fell steadily through the night. And in that hush where no sword called his name, and no voice told him who to be, Aldric dreamed, not of battles, not of running, but of carving wings from wood, and watching them rise. Morning came slowly, wrapped in a blanket of mist that clung low over the hills. The rain had passed, but its memory lingered on the stones that glistened faintly under the dawn light, on the leaves that bowed beneath droplets, and in the air, which smelled clean and new, like something freshly unwrapped. The world felt softer somehow, hushed beneath the weight of damp earth and quiet skies. Aldric woke with no jolt, no urgency. He opened his eyes as though waking from a long, kind breath. His body was warm beneath the blanket, his head resting against the crook of his arm, and outside the window, the faint drip of water still whispered from the rooftop. For a few moments he simply lay still, watching the ceiling as the morning light crept up its stones inch by inch. When he rose, it was with the ease of someone unburdened. He washed slowly, dressed in clean linen, and tied his belt with a gentle knot. His boots still slightly damp from the day before, made soft thuds against the stone floor as he crossed to the window. There the 3 wooden birds sat in a perfect row, his first, the boy's unfinished one, and the new one from the night before. He smiled as he looked at them, letting his fingers brush the wings with the same care he used to give his sword. But there was no sword now. Not in the corner, not at the door, not anywhere near his hands. It had been stored away, not discarded, not forgotten, but retired, like a chapter closed gently, not with bitterness, but with respect. Outside, the keep stirred to life. Soft voices, the clang of a water bucket, the flutter of laundry strung between towers. Aldric walked the corridors not with the purpose of patrol, but with the ease of belonging. The young kitchen maid greeted him as he passed, her hair tucked behind her ears, her hands flour-dusted, and he offered a simple nod, pausing just long enough to lift a fallen apple from the floor and place it gently back in her basket. She smiled. No words. None needed. He spent the morning in the workshop tucked near the old forge, a place now rarely used for warcraft, but still warm with the scent of wood and oil. The boy had begun spending his afternoons here, carving shapes, and animals and tiny scenes from blocks of pine. Aldric joined him, not as a master, but as a quiet presence, shaping, sanding, pausing to admire. The room filled with the gentle sounds of knives scraping, shavings falling, and the occasional whisper of wood grain splitting just right. By midday, Aldric had finished his 4th bird. This one was different. The wings were spread not out, of aggression or speed, but in mid-hover, as if the bird had paused in its flight to feel the wind. He set it beside the others and noticed how, together, they seemed to tell a story, a beginning, a middle, and now, something close to becoming. He stepped outside just as the sun broke through the thinning clouds, casting a golden sheen over the yard. The puddles reflected the sky, and the sound of laughter echoed from the far end of the orchard, where the younger boys chased each other with practice staves. One of them tripped and fell with a yelp. Aldric began to move toward him, but the others had already gathered around, lifting him gently, brushing off his sleeve and covering his staff. The boy nodded, embarrassed but grateful. Aldric stopped where he was and smiled. He remembered what he would expect of him. Taking charge, offered correction. But now he saw that they were learning without him, growing on their own, becoming their own versions of brave. That afternoon it happened all in the silence, not in the training yard, not with formality, just in passing beneath the archway that led to the garden. "You've changed," the captain said simply. Aldric looked up, the sunlight playing in his hair. So have the seasons. The captain nodded once. "You're not leaving?" Aldric shook his head. "Not yet." "Good," the captain said, then added with a slight smirk, "though I admit I was beginning to wonder if you'd turn into a poet." Aldric smiled. "Perhaps I already have." And with that they parted. That evening Aldric returned to the chapel, not for confession, not for prayer, but to sit in the silence. The candle at the altar still burned, just as it always had, its flame small but unflinching. He sat in the front pew, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed. He didn't speak aloud, but thoughts flowed through him like water through reeds quiet, clean, steady. Thank you for the wind, for the rain, for the carving knife, for the boy with the crooked fox, for the breath that still fills me softly. When he opened his eyes, the shadows had grown longer. The chapel was nearly dark, the windows barely lit by the last light of dusk. He stood and walked slowly back to his room, the keep silent except for the murmur of the torch flames and the steady hum of nighttime insects beyond the walls. He entered, closed the door gently, and lit his candle. The bird was still there on the sill, facing out. He sat on the cot and let the quiet down around him. Outside, the stars blinked to light one by one. Inside, Aldric slept without armor, without fear. Only the soft breath of peace rising and falling in the stillness. The stars wheeled quietly across the sky as the keep slumbered beneath them. Stone walls held their breath in the dark, and ivy leaves stirred faintly in the midnight breeze. The great hall stood silent now, no clang of mugs or songs echoing. Through its rafters only the faint creak of old timbers and the soft flicker of a dying hearth. In his chamber, Aldric slept deeply, undisturbed by the sounds of night. His body lay curled gently beneath the light wool blanket, one hand resting. Near the edge of the bed, palm open, relaxed. The wooden birds remained at the windowsill, their small carved wings facing outward, watching the moonlit world in perfect stillness. Sometime before dawn, a light breeze slipped through the cracked window pane and brushed Aldric's face. He stirred but did not wake. His breath remained slow and steady. A dream was unfolding behind his closed eyes, not vivid, not jarring, but gentle and long like a memory returning after many seasons. He dreamed he was walking a forest path, thick with moss and scattered petals, where shafts of morning light filtered down in golden ropes. The trees whispered above him, and with every step the air grew lighter, his body unburdened. There was no destination, just the walk, just the path, and it was enough. He awoke just as the sky began to pale. No trumpet, no voice, just a slow shift from shadow to silver light pressing through the window. He blinked from stretch, his limbs loose and rested. His back didn't ache, his chest didn't feel tight. The air smelled of damp stone and blooming herbs. Somewhere a bird called out, a single low trill that felt like a breathing. He rose and moved to face him, splashing water on his face. It was cold but clean, waking him gently. He ran his fingers through his hair, then looked toward the small wooden chest near the bed. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew what was inside. What mattered more was what was outside the chest, now what had been carried, and released and turned into something else. He dressed in a soft tunic, pale and clean, and tied the leather cord around his neck. The carved hawk rested just beneath his collarbone, warmed by his skin. He stepped out into the corridor, boots barely making a sound on the old stone floor. The keep was still half asleep, lanterns glowing low, the scent of early bread just beginning to stir in the air. He walked to the garden without thinking, feet finding their own path. The roses had opened wider overnight, their petals heavy with dew, bowed slightly like heads in prayer. He knelt beside them, brushing away a bit of loose straw from the base of the tallest one. It was red, deep, and full. He watched a single droplet slide from its edge and fall onto the earth below. The sound of footsteps approached behind him. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. The boy knelt beside him, holding a small bundle wrapped in a cloth. He unwrapped it carefully and revealed a new carving, a deer, this time. The form was slender, the legs delicate, the neck bent slightly, as if it was pausing to drink from a stream. The wood was smoother than before, the work more confident. Aldric smiled. "You're learning its language," the boy beamed. "It feels like listening to something small inside. Not talking, just listening." Aldric nodded. "That's how you know it's true." They didn't speak for a while after that. They just sat together, watching the roses sway in the breeze, letting the quiet hold them in its soft hands. Eventually the boy stood and left, his carving tucked gently under his arm, and Aldric remained in the garden until the sun broke through the clouds. The rest of the day moved easily. He helped lift barrels near the well, nodded to the blacksmith. As he passed the forge, shared a loaf of bread with the steward, who had once rarely spoken to him. There was no weight behind these moments. They were not meant to be remembered, but they were deeply felt. In a way, they mattered more than anything else. That evening, he took a walk along the orchard path, Mora trailing quietly behind him, without a lead. Her hooves made soft thuds in the earth, and Aldric's hand rested against her shoulder, palm flat. The moon had risen by the time they reached the far edge, where the trees thinned and the land opened wide to the valley below. He stopped, took a breath, and looked out over the dark hills. Tiny lanterns twinkled in the village far below, and smoke from evening hearths curled lazily into the stars. The wind moved across the grass in long waves, whispering through the tall blades. He stood there for a long time, saying nothing, just being. It was enough. When he returned to the keep, he passed through the silent hall with low steps. In his chamber, the candle on the table was still unlit. Watching the moonlight wash over the birds. One by one, he stood, not to move, just to feel, to remind himself of what had taken root in him. Then he lay down, putting the blanket over his chin, and turned toward the light outside. The night was quiet. The keep was still, and Aldric, once a boy in iron, now a man in peace, closed his eyes and slept. The morning brought no trumpets, no orders, no rush of feet across the courtyard. Just the low hum of bees near the herb wall, the flutter of pigeons settling on the chapel roof, and the gentle hush of wind moving between towers like an old friend come to visit. Aldric rose with a light, not because he had to, but because his body had come to crave the stillness of those first few moments, the hush before voices filled the day. He stretched slowly, letting each joint move as it wished, and sat at the edge of his bed. The wooden floor beneath his feet was cool and smooth. For a moment he simply breathed long, and even feeling his chest rise and fall like the soft pull of a tide. No thoughts tugged at him. No unfinished task waited with teeth. There was only the now. The hawk at his chest rested warm against his skin. When he stood, it swayed gently with his movement, light and sure, as if it had always been part of him. He opened the shutter with care, and the view welcomed him, mist curling over the orchard, the grass damp and shining. Far below, a washerwoman beat cloth against a flat rock at the stream. Her rhythm was steady, predictable, reassuring. He dressed and left his room with no particular destination. He often wandered this way now, letting his feet subside, where the go-to quiet court down along the stage, He stood there a while, running his fingers along the splintered wood. He remembered the first time he had stood here as a squire, bow trembling. In his grip, eyes stinging with the pressure of expectations. Back then, every arrow felt like a test. Now, it just felt like memory dot. There was a creak behind him, the sound of someone approaching. He turned to see the captain walking up, slower than usual, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. His hair had grayed more since the winter, and his gait had grown deliberate, but his eyes still held that same calm steel. "Didn't think I'd find you back here," the captain said, voice quiet. "Neither did I," Aldric replied, offering a small smile. The captain stepped up beside him and tapped the old target with the edge of his boot. "Place is falling apart." "It still stands," Aldric said. "That's something." The captain chuckled once. "So it is." They stood in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching the vines sway in the breeze. Then the captain spoke again, lower now, as if sharing something not meant to travel far. "I've been thinking of retiring." Aldric turned slightly, but said nothing. The older man stared ahead, eyes narrowed slightly against the sun. "The keep doesn't need me as much anymore. The boys are strong. The walls are sound." Aldric nodded once, slowly. "You've carried enough." There was a long pause. The captain's shoulders eased. "I heard the boys carving now. The youngest one." "He's good," Aldric said softly. "Better than I was at his age." The captain looked at him then, at the gentle, kind of stern lines of his face. "So are you." They said no more. Later, Aldric walked the perimeter of the orchard wall with the boy, pointing out where the mortar had begun to crack, where rain had seeped in, where vines would need cutting before they loosened the stones. The boy listened closely, nodding, his feet light on the path. He carried a small bundle of tools at his side, hands calloused now from shaping wood. There was quiet strength in him, and Aldric saw it clearly, the same strength he had once tried to hide in himself. When they reached the edge of the path, the boy turned and asked, "Why do you always come here?" Aldric looked up at the trees, the way the light filtered through their leaves like falling cloth, the way the wind moved between them like breath, and answered honestly, "Because this is where I remember I'm still alive." The boy nodded, as if that made perfect sense. That evening, Aldric returned to his room and lit a single candle. He did not write. He did not read. He simply sat at the desk, carving once more. The wood in his hand was smooth and pale. A small fox this time, like the one the boy had made long ago. His hands moved slowly, shaping the body, tapering the ears. He worked until the light began to dim and his eyes grew heavy. When he finally lay in bed, he left the window open, letting the warm air drift in, carrying the scent of apple blossoms and the low hum of crickets singing just beyond the wall. His eyes slowly closed, and the soft rush of his breath blended into the hush of night. Got no armor at the door, got no fear in his chest, just rest and the quiet sound of wind, carved and wood, waiting patiently on the sill. The following morning was touched with gold. Not the harsh glare of summer sun, but a warmer, older light, the kind that slips in quietly through wooden shutters and lays itself across the floor like a folded quilt. Aldric awoke slowly, the kind of waking that feels like rising from water. His eyes fluttered open, then closed again as the birds began to sing in the distance. Not urgently, just a few notes here and there. A lullaby that had simply come a little late. He stretched beneath the blanket, joints loose and comfortable, and turned to face the window. The breeze came in cool and smelled faintly of apples and damp stone. The carved animals on the windowsill caught the morning light. 3 birds, the newest fox, and now tucked to the side, a small fawn the boy had carved and given to him with a shy, quiet smile. They didn't speak, of course, these wooden creatures, but their stillness had become a kind of conversation, one he was always welcome to join. He rose and washed his face, humming softly to himself, the tune borrowed from a memory he could no longer place. Perhaps it had been sung to him as a child. Perhaps he'd only heard it once while passing through a market square. Either way, it felt like it belonged here now. The water was cool, waking his skin gently, and he dried his face with the towel that hung near the door. The edges frayed from years of use. His tunic today was a soft brown, simple, and worn at the seams. He slipped it over his head, fastened the belt loosely, and tucked the hawk charm back beneath the fabric, where it rested comfortably against his chest. When he stepped into the corridor, the hall was quiet but alive with early motion, the shuffle of boots, the thud of a bucket, the rustle of linen being hung to dry in the courtyard breeze. He found himself walking not toward the garden, nor the orchard, but to the old bell tower. It wasn't used much anymore, not for summons at least, but he had always been curious about its view. He climbed the narrow stairs slowly, letting his hand drag along the stone wall as he ascended. The air grew cooler with every step. Dust motes drifted in slanted beams of light that filtered through high, narrow slits in the stone. The tower was like a sleeping thing, ancient and forgotten, but somehow still listening. At the top, he opened the heavy wooden hatch and stepped out onto the ledge. The wind greeted him at once, brushing through his hair and tugging gently at the edges of his tunic. He inhaled slowly and looked out. The world stretched wide before him, green hills undulating like soft waves, dotted with tiny homes and crisscrossed by narrow paths where carts moved like ants. The orchard was just below, bright with new leaves. Beyond that, the woods. Beyond the woods, distant hills. And above all of it, the sky blue, endless. Alive. He stood there for a long while, letting the view settle into his bones. There had been a time, not long ago, when this height would have made him feel small, overwhelmed, unsteady. But now it only made him feel quiet, as if the world and all its vastness could hold him without question, without expectation. Eventually, he descended again, moving slowly down the spiral, the soles of his boots brushing lightly over worn stone. He passed no one on the way down. The keep was waking in its own rhythm, and Aldric had no need to catch up. By midday, he was sitting beneath the elm tree again, Mora beside him, chewing slowly on wild grass. In his lap, a block of wood rested, half-shaped into the beginnings of an owl. He carved without urgency, letting the motion guide him rather than the result. The wind rustled the tall grass, and the tree above creaked faintly. He could hear the kitchen bell ringing in the distance, signaling lunch, but he didn't move right away. His hunger was soft. So was the day. The boy passed by on the edge of the hill, holding a satchel of tools, his sleeves rolled up, hair tousled. When he saw Aldric, he paused, waved, and came closer. "Another bird?" he asked. "Owl this time," Aldric said, smiling. The boy sat down beside him and pulled out a strip of cedar, beginning to shape a rabbit with small, confident hands. They worked side by side, knees nearly touching, blades making soft scraping. Sounds over wood. No need to speak. Only now and then did one of them look up to smile, or nod, or point to a new angle in the grain. The wind continued its slow wandering around them, and once a butterfly landed on Aldric's knee and sat there for a full minute before fluttering off toward the sky dot. By the time the sun began to sink, they had finished both creatures. Aldric's owl looked thoughtful, its wings pressed close to its sides. The boy's rabbit was mid-hop, ears perked, as though listening for something just out of reach. They lined them up with the others on the small shelf they built near. The wall 7 carvings now, each one unique, each one whispering something of the hand that shaped it. That night, Aldric didn't light the candle. He sat in the dark, letting the moonlight speak for him. It poured across the floor in quiet streaks, pale and cool. He sat at the window for a while, elbows on the sill, watching the stars flicker like ancient thoughts too old to name. He didn't need to write. The words were already in him. He didn't need to pray. His life had become its own kind of offering. And when he finally turned in, pulling the blanket up to his chest, he whispered something without sound, just the shape of breath moving into the stillness. Thank you. And then the night closed around him, soft and complete, and he slept. The next morning began not with birdsong, but with mist. A thick, pale veil had drifted over the hills in the night, and now it rested over the keep like a hush over a sleeping child. The towers were barely outlines. The trees of the orchard disappeared into the gray. Even the distant village seemed to have vanished, leaving only silence and fog. Aldric stood at his window, watching the mist curl and drift like slow smoke through the air. He didn't mind the stillness. In fact, he welcomed it. The keep moved more quietly on days like this. Boots fell softer on the stones. Doors opened and closed with more care. Even the kitchen seemed slower, its usual clatter reduced to muffled clinks and soft laughter. It felt like the world was holding its breath, not in fear, but in reverence, as if even the wind knew something sacred had settled over the land. Aldric dressed and stepped out into the courtyard. The air wrapped around him like a damp cloak, but it wasn't cold. The mist beaded gently on his sleeves. He walked slowly past the well and the chapel and the empty practice yard until he reached the low bench beneath the garden wall. The roses, barely visible through the fog, looked like soft smudges of color ghosts of summer resting in place. He sat down and closed his eyes. The quiet pressed close but never felt heavy. He listened to the faintest drip of water from the eaves, to the distant creak of wood under shifting weight, to the silence within his own body. His breath matched the rhythm of the fog. Deep, slow even. Eventually he heard footsteps, the boy's light and cautious, almost respectful of the silence. Aldric opened his eyes as the boy approached and sat beside him. "It's like a dream today," the boy whispered. Aldric nodded. "A quiet one." They didn't speak again for a while. They just sat side by side in the fog, sharing its peace. The boy reached into his satchel and pulled out a small carving, a squirrel. paws held close to its chest, tail curled high over its back. Aldric smiled and held out his palm. The boy passed it to him, and Aldric turned it gently between his fingers. "You're seeing the shape before you even start now," he said. The boy's cheeks colored, but he nodded. "It's like the wood already knows what it wants to be. I just help." "That's how it is with most things," Aldrich said, placing the squirrel back in the boy's hand. "We don't shape life as much as we think. We just help it become." They added the new carving to the ledge with the others. 8 now, and soon 9 or 10. He didn't feel the need to count too far ahead. The shelf would hold what it needed to, no more. No less that afternoon when the mist began to lift and the shapes of trees returned to the edge of vision, Aldrich walked the trail down to the lower field. He hadn't been there in weeks, not since the early spring, when the earth was still hard. Now the grass was high and soft beneath his boots, and butterflies darted among the clover. He let his fingers brush the tops of the wildflowers as he passed. Their petals cool with dew dot at the edge of the field stood an old tree tall, wide, its branches thick and spread like open arms. He approached it slowly and placed a hand on the bark, feeling its rough, warm texture under his palm. The tree had been here longer than the keep, longer than any captain. It had watched generations come and go and made no sound about any of it. It had just stood, grown, weathered. Aldrich sat beneath it and leaned against the trunk, tilting his head back. The sky above was finely visible soft blue, with streaks of thin white cloud. A hawk wheeled high above, cutting quiet circles into the sky. He didn't think about who he had been when he first came here, not in the way one might compare scars. He simply remembered. He thought of the boy who had tightened his straps too quickly, who had cried into a blanket in silence, who had wanted to prove something before understanding what it was he truly needed. And then, without any announcement or ceremony, he forgave that boy, fully, quietly, as easy as exhaling. He sat there until the sun shifted low in the sky, warming one side of the tree, casting long shadows that stretched back toward the orchard. Then he stood, dusted off his tunic, and made his way back up the trail. His steps were slow, but they felt sure, not driven, just present. That evening he returned to his chamber and opened the wooden chest one final time. The letters were still there, some creased at the corners, some unopened for seasons. He sat beside them and ran his fingers over the stack. Then, slowly, he lifted the bundle and placed it into a cloth bag. He didn't burn them. He didn't throw them away. He simply tied the bag with twine and placed it at the back of the shelf, no longer a weight, but a keepsake, a seed. Then, with the same calm, he took out a fresh piece of parchment, and for the first time in many days, he began to write not about what had been, but about what was. "The orchard was quiet today," he wrote. "I saw a hawk fly over the old tree. I didn't flinch." He paused, breath, then continued. "I've stopped waiting for something to change. It already has." That night, the moon rose slowly over the keep, full and pale, casting a soft silver light across the stones. The orchard shimmered in its glow, each leaf catching the light like threads of silk. The breeze had settled into something almost still, barely nudging the ivy on the walls. Even the birds had gone quiet content, perhaps, To let the night speak for itself, Dot in his room, Aldric stood at the window, candle unlit, eyes lifted to the sky. He held the final carving in his hands, a hawk in flight, wings fully spread, eyes forward. He had spent days finishing it, not because the work was difficult, but because he wanted to give it time, to let it grow in his hands the same way he had grown beneath the weight of stillness. He ran his thumb along the wings, not to check for flaws, but simply to feel the shape. It was balanced, light, alive. When he placed it beside the others, the shelf was full. 10 creatures, each with their own quiet story. He looked at them for a long while, then stepped back and breathed in slowly. There was nothing more to do, Dot, and that was the most peaceful truth of all. He lay down on the bed and rested his hands over his chest, fingers lightly touching the pendant beneath his tunic. The hawk that had been carved long ago by his sister, with laughing eyes and a soft voice, still rested there, unchanged, but it no longer felt like a reminder of what he had lost. It felt like a thread, something that had been tied gently around his heart to keep him grounded while the rest of him learned how to rise. His breath deepened. The rhythm of sleep began to circle him, gentle and sure. Outside, the wind stirred once more, just enough to rustle the orchard leaves and pass softly through the narrow halls of the keep. And then a sound, distant hooves on the path, slow and steady, not a warning, not an arrival, just a traveler passing by. Aldric did not stir Dot in his dream. He was walking again through tall grass, barefoot, the sun warming his shoulders. The orchard was ahead, full of light and laughter. Someone was whittling beneath a tree, a pile of shavings at their feet. The birds on the branches were not silent. They sang, and somewhere nearby, a younger version of himself looked up from a wooden block, smiled, and nodded once. Not goodbye, but thank you.